Graceman Knowledge All, GMK. Welcome to my YouTube channel, where you are taught all you need to know about accounting, finance, and lots more. Remember to like, share, and subscribe.
I will talk about the accounting treatment of property, plant, and equipment at initial recognition. It is also important to talk about the accounting treatment at subsequent measurement. So, at subsequent measurements, two models are permitted by IAS 16. And what are the models? We have the cost model, which talks about the historical cost of the assets. What does this mean? This means that the historical cost of the assets will be the measurement of the assets all through the useful life of such assets. And we also have the evaluation model. The evaluation model is the fair value at the measurement. So the evaluation model talks about the fair value of the assets at measurement date. What does this historical cost mean? This historical cost model simply means that every time the property, plant, and equipment is prepared and presented in the financial statement, it will be the costs less the accumulated depreciation. While the revaluation model on the other side talks about the revalued amount less the accumulated depreciation. The cost model is quite straightforward. Why is it straightforward? It is straightforward because the historical cost will be used all through the useful life of the property, plant, and equipment. But for revaluation can be done as often as possible. Now, how do we account for revaluation? So, accounting for revaluation, what's the formula for revaluation? Revaluation is different between the carrying amount of the non-current asset at the revaluation date and the valuation of the asset. The valuation of the asset simply means the fair value of the asset at revaluation date. So the difference between the two can either give us gain or loss, and this gain or loss simply means revaluation surplus or revaluation loss or deficit. When do we have revaluation surplus? We have revaluation surplus when the revaluation amount is greater than the carrying amount. Another word for carrying amount is the nearable value of the asset at measurement date. While revaluation loss or deficit means that the revaluation amount is less than the carrying amount or the nearable value of the asset at measurement date. For emphasis, revaluation surplus is when the revaluation amount is greater than the carrying amount or the nearable value of the asset at measurement date. While revaluation loss or deficit happens when the revaluation amount is less than the carrying amount or the nearable value of the asset. Now for revaluation surplus, we also have revaluation surplus at initial revaluation, and we also have it at subsequent revaluation. At initial revaluation simply means that the first time an asset is revalued, what is the accounting treatment for what? Revaluation surplus. And another scenario is, if that is not the first time the asset is being revalued, what will be the treatment of what? Revaluation surplus. And that is what subsequent evaluation is. So that means that subsequent evaluation of the asset will determine whether the evaluation is initial or subsequent, will determine the treatment of what? Revaluation surplus. For evaluation deficit or evaluation loss, it can also happen at what? Initial evaluation and what? Subsequent. So that simply means that when an asset is revalued and experiencing evaluation loss at initial recognition, there is an accounting treatment for it. And if it is a subsequent evaluation, there is an accounting treatment for it. Taking this further, what will be the accounting treatment of revaluation surplus at initial revaluation and at subsequent revaluation? Revaluation surplus at initial revaluation. So the treatment of revaluation surplus at initial valuation, this simply means that at the first time of revaluing the concerned property, plant and equipment, at initial recognition of revaluation surplus, the non-current asset will be debited with the revaluation surplus. Why? Because the value of the asset has increased. While the revaluation reserve will be credited with the word revaluation amount. And we know that the revaluation reserve is part of the equity component in the statement of financial position. Now, how do we treat revaluation surplus at subsequent revaluation? Now, at subsequent revaluation, the condition for this is, at subsequent revaluation, should it be that the previous revaluation was revaluation deficit? What needs to be done is this will not be done. At second revaluation, at subsequent revaluation of revaluation surplus, that means that on the condition that the previous revaluation led to revaluation deficit, that means that whatever the revaluation deficit was, the subsequent revaluation surplus will be used to nil off the revaluation deficit, and the difference, the higher of the figure, or the difference between the two, will now be posted to revaluation reserve. What does that mean? That simply means that for subsequent revaluation, profit or loss will credit profit or loss to the extent of revaluation deficit, while the non-current assets will still debit the non-current assets, and will credit the revaluation surplus account with the excess of the revaluation surplus over the initial revaluation deficit. We have detailed exposition to explain what we have there. So just a little recap. At initial recognition of valuation surplus, because the value of the current asset and non-current asset has decreased, it will be debited, and the valuation reserve account will be credited. And as subsequent revaluation, with the assumption that the initial revaluation was a revaluation deficit, so the revaluation surplus in the subsequent revaluation will be used to nil off the revaluation deficit at the initial recognition, while the excess of the revaluation surplus and over the revaluation deficit at initial recognition will be credited to the revaluation surplus account. So we have revaluation deficit at initial revaluation. Revaluation deficit at initial revaluation will profit or loss will be debited with the what? With the revaluation deficit. While the non-current assets will be credited with the revaluation deficit. While the non-current assets will be credited with the revaluation deficit. Just as it was explained when we are talking about the revaluation of revaluation surplus. So what that means is that so the assumption here is, let's assume that the previous revaluation was revaluation surplus, and now we have revaluation deficit. So the same will apply. What will happen? Knowing fully well that the previous revaluation surplus, revaluation reserve was credited, the revaluation reserve will be debited to the extent of the initial revaluation deficit, while the non-current assets will be credited with the revaluation deficit, and the profit or loss will be debited with the excess of the revaluation deficit over the initial revaluation surplus. Some illustrations here. The first illustration says, my Q1 has a land with a carrying amount of 4 million naira on the 1st January 1995. As at December 1995, same land was valued at 5 million naira. Show the accounting treatment of the revaluation. What is the formula for revaluation? Formula for revaluation is revaluation amount minus carrying amount. Our revaluation amount here is 5 million naira. What is the carrying amount? 4 million naira. What's the revaluation amount? 1 million naira. And we said that revaluation surplus happens when the revaluation amount is what greater than what carrying amount, and revaluation deficit happens when the revaluation amount is less than the what carrying amount. Looking at this question, the revaluation amount is greater than the carrying amount. That means that this 1 million is what revaluation surplus. As it's revaluation surplus, what's the accounting treatment for revaluation surplus? The accounting treatment for revaluation surplus is the non-current asset will be debited with what 1 million naira, while the revaluation reserve will be credited with 1 million naira. Why is the non-current asset debited 1 million naira? Because the value of the asset has increased. And why is the revaluation reserve credited 1 million naira? Because this is the initial revaluation. So we go to the second illustration. My Q1 carried the land in its book, same land, at 5 million naira. So my Q1 carried the book in land as what 5 million naira. So that means the carrying amount now is what 5 million naira. And the same land was valued at what 3.3 million naira. So that means that even from it we can say that this is a revaluation deficit. But just to test it, we said that the formula for revaluation is revaluation amount minus carrying amount. Our revaluation amount here is 3.3 million minus carrying amount of what 5 million. This is that the revaluation amount is minus 1.7 million. And because the revaluation amount is less than the carrying amount, this is a what? Revaluation deficit. If this was at initial recognition, the treatment would have been to credit the non-current assets with 1.7 million and debit the profit or loss with 1.7 million. But we will not treat it that way because this is second revaluation. And because it's second revaluation, we said that the revaluation deficit will be debited to the revaluation reserve account to the extent of the initial revaluation surplus. For emphasis, the revaluation deficit at subsequent revaluation will be debited to the revaluation surplus account to the extent of the what initial revaluation surplus. Now, look, was the initial revaluation surplus? The initial revaluation surplus was what 1 million naira. Initial revaluation surplus equals to 1 million naira. So that simply means that we are going to debit the revaluation reserve account with what? With 1 million naira. Knowing fully well that 1.7 million naira is the reduction in the non-current asset, that means that what? The non-current asset will also be credited with what? 1.7 million naira. 700,000 naira is left here. What do? We now debit profit or loss with what? 700,000 naira. What will be the journal entry for this? The journal entry will be revaluation reserve will be debited with what? 1 million naira. The non-current assets will be credited with 1.7 million naira. The remaining 700,000 naira is the excess of the revaluation deficit over the initial revaluation surplus. The profit or loss with what? With 700,000 naira. Going to the third illustration, that Grace Holdings has a property with a carrying amount of 25 million naira. Carrying amount of 25 million naira on the 31st of March 1997 at 31st March 1997. At 31st March 1998, the land was valued at 22 million naira. Revalued amount 22 million naira at 31st March 1998. Looking at this, we can see that the revaluation amount is less than the carrying amount. That means here we have 3 million naira revaluation deficit. Why is it deficit? It's deficit because the revaluation amount is less than the carrying amount. And note, this is at initial revaluation. Because it is at initial revaluation, what do? The profit or loss will be debited with the valuation deficit, while the non-current assets will be credited with the what? Valuation deficit. What is the valuation deficit? 3 million naira. 3 million. Why? Because this is at what? Initial recognition. And please do note that the property we are talking about, all this land, they are what? Non-depreciable item. What is the journal entry for this? We have a description. Debit side, on our credit side, our currency. Profit or loss will be debited with 3 million naira, while our non-current assets will be credited with 3 million naira at initial revaluation. Now we go to the fourth question. That Grace Holdings carries property at 22 million naira as at 31st March 1998. At the same date, the property was revalued at 26.5 million naira due to the rise in the value of what? Assets. Going to illustration 4, the carrying amount was 22 million naira. Now it has been revalued at 26.5 million naira. Looking at this, we can see that this is a revaluation surplus of 4.5 million naira. And since it is 4.5 million naira, which is valuation surplus, if this was an initial revaluation, the accounting entry would have been to debit the non-current asset with 4.5 million and credit the revaluation reserve with 4.5 million. But this is a subsequent revaluation, and because it's a subsequent revaluation, the accounting treatment will be to debit the non-current asset with 4.5 million, be the valuation surplus, and credit the profit or loss to the extent of the initial revaluation deficit. What do? This is a subsequent revaluation surplus. And because it's a subsequent revaluation surplus, the accounting entry of debiting the non-current assets with valuation surplus and crediting valuation reserve will not work. Why? Because this is subsequent valuation. What do we do in this case? We will debit the non-current assets with 4.5 million, credit the profit or loss to the extent of the initial revaluation deficit. And what was the initial revaluation deficit? 3 million naira. The difference between 4.5 million and 3 million naira is 1.5 million, and this will be credited to our revaluation reserve account, 1.5 million. What is the journal entry? The journal entry, our non-current assets will be debited by what? 4.5 million naira. The profit or loss will be credited with 3 million naira to the extent of the initial revaluation deficit, while our revaluation reserve account will be credited with 1.5 million naira.
Thank you so much for watching. Do not forget to like, share, and subscribe.